Okay, we're at part 2 of the series. If you haven't seen part 1 and have found yourself here, you can go to the end of this one and go in your top right hand corner and click on that. That will be part 1. In fact, it's probably going to be a 4 or 5 part series, and each time it will be in the top right hand corner that will take you back, but also the next one in the series, i.e. part 3 that we'll be going to after this, will be in your top left hand corner over here. This right here is some cave art that's been accredited to Neanderthals, and it shows a pretty good understanding of things here too. You can see the depiction is of some type of early buffalo type of concept, and the forelock, the legs, the cloven hoofs, the way the loin looks, the extra hair down and up under the chest and under the chins. One strange thing it shows here is that it's got some fur that's here, not really any on this part of the hump, and then the back of the hump has more fur on it. You see some on the inclination and maybe even some down on the back just a little bit. But then again, this was during the last ice age and so on, and there were very many woolly creatures, could be different. It doesn't really appear that these things that came from this have a neck that bends at this angle, but if they bend their head down to graze, they do get this form. But so maybe it's something like that. What we were just discussing is how that people used to think that Neanderthals were ugh and all of that, but we found burials and things like that. But earliest of cave paintings and arts, perspective artists in the 15th century European art movements were saying, we created nothing new by the art that we have nowadays. We think that we're at the top edge of everything, but you're looking back at something that's supposed to be that old, and it just blew him away that people had things going on that. And this is not the picture, but the pictures of depictions of animals by mainly Cro-Magnons and so on. And they're best known for deep underground caves in France and Belgium. And she says, so much for dumb, lurking, simpleton, nose-picking, belly-rubbing Neanderthals, knuckle-dragging, or ugh, as I would say. But we're finding that a lot of information coming from this shows intricate knowledge of things dating way back. And with the new finding of places like Göbekli Tepe, and I'm currently dealing with a lot of that around 10,000 BC, there are gaps in between, though, at 22,000 BC, Kamyana Mohila, and then things like this earlier, and a few artifacts. Why? Well, in a deep cave with things being kept just in the right conditions, they got left alone enough to where they're still here. But this is a rare thing, and they had to go all in a cave and do this, basically in the dark and things like this. This was done in some sacred manner for them to do. Everybody thought they were old cave dwellers. No, caves were used in special environments for special things and burials, and sometimes, and that's lucky why they were used in that capacity, or that's why we find them. Sure, there were people living out in a cave openings and things like that and using it for shelter too, but it's different than what we had thought from before. Some other revelations and recent new discoveries about this previous thought primitive human species have led scientists to reassess their definition of what exactly is a unique human trait. Seems Neanderthals were more like modern humans than we previously thought or were led to believe. For instance, they also figured out how to make a man-made pitch made from heating birch tree bark. After chemical analysis, it was found to be a man-made and manufactured thermoplastic material, a superglue of sorts, and not sap as thought at first. When they thought they had used sap and then maybe heated it up and it kind of crystallized and bubbled up and did its thing, but no, it looks like it was this incredible process that they used, and all they had to do was flick some of it out of there and run it through the gas chromatograph and try to figure it out. And luckily we use something very similar to this today. And it included pitch extraction, thermal processes, several hours long, involving 600-degree heat from a controlled fire, and a dry distillation with the exclusion of oxygen. They knew freaking oxygen-free dry distillation. What? That's an advanced thing, and they got all these tubes hooked up now to try to pull it off. And they're saying back in Neanderthal times, their weapons show that they utilized stuff just to make the glue that were holding the crap together out of something that requires a kiln type thing and a controlled fire and being able to choke the oxygen levels at certain points and things like that. That's quite a feat. Even in modern day, it's somewhat a feat, although we look over our modern feats that we've come about, the expounding knowledge as being somewhat ho-hum in our quest for even more. When you look at something like this, it's just like, what? This would make Neanderthals the engineer of the world's first and oldest synthetic materials, as well as the first to introduce a genuine industrial process, earliest known so far. Not us, but the Neanderthals. And all of this only about 200,000 years ago. Archaeologists have so far been unable to replicate this manufacturing process using Paleolithic technology alone. And something interesting I'll throw in right here, we found in Jebel Arud cave older and older modern humans, Homo sapiens, and so instead of being about 200,000 year old for Homo sapiens, it appears that they go back some 315,000 years. And this makes an odd contemporary of Neanderthal during this whole time. This has led other people to say, what if they were Neanderthal, because it's so close, was the same thing, but integrated with something else, unidentified at this point, and that's what made its small difference. And it's not evident in these people, and therefore the thing that went with the Neanderthal gave it that, but reintegration gave it back to us. Like what can be seen in other places and not seen in other places can show you this difference. Archaeologists have so far been unable to replicate this manufacturing processes using Paleolithic technology alone, i.e. they would have to make some type of pottery and all these other things, and this is pre-pottery Neolithic, and you can't give that. And they sure don't have glass beakers going on or any type of container that you could be doing this type of thing in this controlled environment. So how would they be doing this? We haven't found that, but we have found the evidence of their doing it. We didn't find a tube of super glue, but we found something they've got, and it's super glued together. Far from being the violent brutes as they are traditionally depicted as, Colin Wilson, author of In Atlantis and the Kingdom of the Neanderthals, sounds like a strange geared book, shows that the Neanderthals had sophisticated mathematical and astrological knowledge, including the understanding of the precession of the equinoxes, etc. I'd like to probably learn about that a little bit more, for we're talking about that and sacred geometry and how all that works together too. And there have been pointings to that, probably with the cave wall paintings as I've shown you before on the other one. But that's relegated to Cro-Magnon. Much more accurate DNA-based reconstruction has also shown that they did look much different from us. Hence the non-surprising idea of interbreeding at some past distant point. Whenever I was a kid, I saw them and they were trying to say they were Ugg and stuff, and I was like, well, if you just shave him up. And they always gave them these extreme eyebrow bulges and everything onto them, but when you looked at the skulls, it wasn't so prominent on all of them, but apparently some of the earlier ones. And so you get this idea, well, oh, this is the evolution of them. But then whenever they dated them, they said, no, these are older than these and these. So like there's a variation on a theme going on here, a little more than you want to give credit for it. Apparently it shows up, but the source population of non-African humans 70,000 years ago, or early modern man, was already more closely related to Neanderthals than others in Africa or sub-Saharan Africa, which long before then had ancient genetic divisions even within itself. It was not a factor in the early European genetics or play a part in the European DNA evolutionary process. There were actually at least 3 species of humans, or perhaps subspecies of humans, that coexisted in Europe and Asia at the same time that aren't cohabitating or are separated from sub-Saharans. And it is known, however, that Neanderthal and early European modern man genetic hybridization resulted in the first, what we would call Europeans, or a Cro-Magnon type, in the first place, and that's perhaps how the genetics changed, and somehow out of that, glean, something special clicked, i.e. the dominant. But we talked about Eve, there's Eurasian Adam, but maybe it goes back a little older than that too. For even if you find somebody Eurasian Adam, or you find that all blue-eyed people are related to this one guy, that guy had a dad. And how far did those genetics go back? And it seems that Neanderthals had blue and green eyes and red hair, and is who we got it from? No, it seems like the Homo sapiens we're looking at too have that same thing. Well, did they have the real pale OCA2 gene and all that? No, they get strong at a certain point here and runs over. Geneticists say that light skin genes and hair perhaps go back 600,000 BC, and that's just a projection on genetic mapping, and that becomes a blanket over humanity, or at least what the area we're talking about here, at some 60,000 BC. So it also makes you wonder why everybody in the Orient and India has real straight hair instead, and never showing these light genes and stuff. And I've been showing you the projected answers to that in other videos that I won't get into here for want of this staying on. Researchers recovered ancient DNA of Neanderthals by extracting the DNA from specimens from the Vinija cave, Croatia, and other bones found in Spain, Russia, and Germany, and elsewhere. Results found genetic evidence for fair-skinned, light, and even red-haired, as well as blue-eyed, and even DNA evidence for freckles. The long-held assumption of a lurking, hairy, gorilla-like appearance is now seen to be incorrect, as well as the previously held assumptions about their intelligence level. They definitely were not sitting around scratching themselves and eating bugs. This is fascinating stuff that has been coming out over even just the past 3 years. Of course, this is back in 2015. The analysis and research of David Reich, who is well known, and geneticist at the Harvard Medical School, who is behind many of these recent discoveries, is Neanderthals live on in non-Africans. And because we have some small admix from Neanderthals, some of them live on. Some people project, but we haven't got the genetics yet, that the ghost hominid that's showing up in sub-Saharan Africans is an Australopithecine species with Homo erectus bred in making it. But the current Bantu type people only seem to show up as a modern form in the last 5,000, 5,500 years, they say. And before that, they were proto-Negroid referred to, and the oldest one they found of those is like 9100 BC. So their origins are somewhat unknown because of that type, and literally because of the jungle and the habitat that they lived in, and its acidic nature and things. It's just as bad as trying to go to the Amazon and trying to find people there, and it would be real hard to find one that was preserved. You know, you really got to find something like a peat bog that got to be done in a certain way shortly after and sealed in a way, and it, you know, or we don't get fossils of pretty much anything, right? Neanderthal-derived DNA accounts for an estimated 1 to 4% of the Eurasian genome. Findings show that the DNA difference between many modern humans and Neanderthals is only 3 million base pairs out of the total of 6 billion base pairs in the human genome. This figure amounts to about 0.5% difference between the human Neanderthal DNA. So between the two of them, and incredibly, this is the same DNA base pair difference on average as between you and a common stranger on the street. Things like this led us more to believe that no, they're not ugly and don't look like anything, and so on, and so they wouldn't look anything different than what you might see today. Base pairs which account for the gender and individual inherited differences such as hair, eye color, height, and facial characteristics, so on, would be those little slight differences that you would recognize but wouldn't stand out as much as if you took somebody just from the recent commercials, and even a caveman could do it. You could easily tell that guy. Or you remember Caveman Lawyer from SNL? I'm just a caveman, but results also show that Cro-Magnon DNA is identical to the DNA sequences of modern humans. And that was a huge revelation there, for you think that, it's going and genetics is changing all the time and going on, and yet something like that lingers on to this day. And it shows you that, well, for at least on that one specimen of 28,000 years, it hasn't changed. There are people all over Europe that have that same thing. And so Homo sapiens has been around for 315,000 years in its variations, one of which is still standing here today at 28,000 years ago. That probably gives a real good revelation to some people. On a side note, populations without Neanderthal DNA are still found in the world today. And that's true, but it's in sub-Saharan Africa. And the truth be known on that, they actually do have Neanderthal integration for most of those populations, has been shown with recent genetics have admix. And because of the admix, they've been brought a little more into leaning this way with phenotype too and their genetics. And so they, while have gotten a small amount of somebody who had 1.4, they have a skosh because of it. Here's a picture of what Cro-Magnon's recreation would look like, and it looks like modern man today. In fact, shaving. In fact, isn't that guy that used to play for the Chargers? Anyhow, and that's a recreation off the skull. Cro-Magnon sequenced DNA 28,000 years ago was obtained from fossil bones discovered in the Puglisi cave in Italy. The results show that DNA is identical to the DNA sequences of certain modern Europeans. The DNA sequences remain static and unchanged for over 28,000 years. I believe it's N as its derivative and its derivatives and things, which I believe contains R1b and all those that come off of it somehow. This means that Cro-Magnon was a fully modern individual who perhaps had a larger brain capacity. So that, here again, the statement of re-examining the out of Africa theory that's taken directly from that paper, and all the SNPs that European people carry that African people don't, and African people carry that they don't. There's another thing known as the Mooc7 gene that they found in their saliva. It's another point that shows that even though everybody's got the same saliva, there are proteins in your saliva and everything that are totally different than all these other people's proteins. Oh, you got the same spit and everything, but it's just, that's different. Cro-Magnon DNA sequence 28,000 years ago was obtained from fossil bones discovered in Puglisi cave. The results show that DNA is identical to DNA sequences of certain modern Europeans. The DNA sequences has remained static and unchanged for over 28,000 years. And that's really shot the whole little idea thing in the foot. We'll get into that in a minute. course, this means that Cro-Magnon was a fully modern individual who perhaps was built more strongly and had a larger brain capacity. Some individuals have been seen reaching 7 feet and stuff. 6'5" is very common, and you can see it, that trait held on even when people were around 5'5" or less on average. For the Tarim Basin mummies are well over 6 foot, and 6 foot females are found in this, and so on. There's been other bones found a lot of places that strangely either get said that, oh, well, this is somebody with megalomania or somebody with gigantism, or you never hear from them again. The study went further. They sequenced the DNA of the 123 people who could have been in contact with that DNA and with all the fossils since their discovery to rule out contamination by modern humans. They did this as a fail-safe measure, so somebody couldn't come along later and go, no, that's just contamination. Like whenever they started doing all the Egyptian mummies, and it was showing up European DNA left and right, and they tried to do contamination, and they, okay, well, here's how we did it, here we were going to do it again and everything, and wow, okay. And so now they developed better techniques just in the last few years in certain bones inside their skull and teeth, and ways of doing it that you're able to pull a little bit more out. And then of course the machines that go along with it, and then the base knowledge is what really makes the whole thing work. For the base knowledge of what they have all in it gets derived to where you can understand who's who and who has what, SMPs and different things, not just haplogroups, and it can pin down things to a much finer level, let's just say. If Neanderthal is supposed to have lived in Europe beginning at around 300,000 years old, and Cro-Magnon for the last 30,000 years or so, and it turns out that their modern DNA is unchanged since that time, when did we do all that evolving? And this is like a key point question here. But if modern human Homo sapiens sapiens has been found at Gibelerud Cave at 315,000 BC, a lot of the papers will just say 300K. So if Neanderthal is supposed to be around 300,000 years ago, and Cro-Magnon, not Cro-Magnon, but Homo sapiens, sorry, was around 300,000 years ago, and we didn't get DNA out of them necessarily to the full extent that we did these, and it's doubtful we'll be able to pull it at ages like that. But if this happened, when did we supposedly do all of that evolving? And so in the some Afrocentric models have the idea that Negroid primitive albinos somehow turned into, of course a Negroid albino has Negroid children and doesn't change morphically, and black people living up north are not going to suddenly change into blue-eyed Caucasians. In the short term or the long term, you see some lighter black people nowadays, and this is from Admix, so the idea that all from one shortly ago, as opposed to a distant connected common ancestor, is not showing to be really a possibility. And if you'd say that, oh, we eventually evolved and we just showed up 8,000 years ago, and you're like, no, man, people are showing that this and this lineage here that we're making up, modern humans, Caucasians here, seems to go around 300,000 years, and at least for the last 30,000 years remained unchanged. And they say anatomically modern human is different than a modern human, meaning you can have 10 toes and things and everything that goes on, but you're not modern yet. And for a long time they agreed somewhere around 180,000 years ago that we're just the same now as we were then. It's the same Ken doll. It's Ken doll, it's G.I. Joe, they're all the same. Now it's not even what you're trying to put on UGG. And that would have been these 30,000-year-old and to 45 Neanderthal and all these things happening. And so where do we do all this evolving at, though? There's another whole way to look at that exact same question, but the fact is, before that, they were quite different. So she says that should shut the mouth of the naysaying scientists who were having a wee bit of trouble seeing their caveman vanish into thin air. And maybe it will. But they have a hard time letting go, man. In fact, they already feel like they've done squished this whole concept. All they had to do was put their fingers in their ears and go, nah, 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 I can't hear you, nah, 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 and walk away. And then act like, smirk, we got it all figured out. That's all you got to do. Because you're challenging their norm. And they're riding on a high horse. And you're challenging this incredible wall of dogma. And they're not real willing to look at things very much in any new light. But it slowly pecks away at it. And so in my lifetime, I've seen it get pecked away totally. And I don't know the way kids believe today, but yeah, I think they're still taught that UGG and everything going on. But if you get into it, you'll find that no, it's not quite accurate. In fact, genetics and the way people are led to believe, not quite maybe accurate. And in a few more years, we might have it a little more figured out, and then this would have shown its fruition one way or another. A short time ago, in another article, earlier this year about Neanderthal Man, scientists reported that their DNA sequencing of a 38,000-year-old Neanderthal man showed that his DNA matched modern man by 99.99%. That's the same DNA match that exists between any two people living today. With common types for sure. If you take European people walking around and stuff, that's the same type of match that would go today. Strange things were said over time and stuff, and we're 96% the same as a chimpanzee and everything. Oh yeah, well we're 92% the same as a banana, right? Well, you look at far reach here and far reach there, i.e. sub-Saharan Africans versus a European or Nordic type, and you'll see a variation that's as wide as, say, a wolf. And any dog, Chihuahua, if you want to say that's as far broad just because of size and variance, well, they find that variant could mean as much as at least 8%, 6 to 8%. And there's supposed to be some commonality that they throw into all these deals. And when they're saying, if you look at Neanderthals and so on, it's about 99, and it shows you there's a closer variation between Neanderthals. Well, let me see if I get this right. This was what was written by somebody else after reading the paper and their commentary on it. It showed that modern man and Neanderthals are closer than saying a Scotchman and an Irishman, if you will, without picking on certain people. And actually closer to than what they used to say, at least, a chimpanzee was to that Irishman versus a black man to that Irishman. A black man to that chimpanzee. Yeah, that's right. Let's move on. That being said, science has now found that the entire caveman evolutionary myth made real by portraying Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal Man as short, brutish, dumb, and hairy versus one tall, hairy man, and they get in fights, has been replaced with a new reality which, unlike most of Darwinism, actually is backed up by the fossil record. Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal both had larger brains than modern man, and neither were found in Africa. And you look at these different ones and they show oldest ones and prognathism, and it runs up, and then all of a sudden no prognathism, and then all of a sudden prognathism again, and it's like you've got these out of order in some places. No, this is all the same, and it's like that's not all the same. These are scientists at this very moment who claim that Neanderthal could not speak. There are still scientists that say that whenever there's been all these things that say it, because they don't want to lose their grip. They'll say that he had no language, that he did not interbreed with Cro-Magnon or modern man even. Yeah, we have those still. There are still scientists who claim that Cro-Magnon never learned how to ride a horse. These evolutionists refuse to come out of the cave. We have depictions of a time whenever Cro-Magnons were hardy in cave painting walls verified to those dates. I've showed it in a couple of different videos of men on a horse. And how far does horse riding go back? I did one about cowboys and Scythians, and how they had basically wagons and horses and stuff in Yahoo! And how that you think of as a Wild West thing, but something very similar to that's been going on a long time ago. In fact, here's this cave picture. What do you make of that? So how long have there been cowboys? Well, cowboys when we started farming cows and stuff, but it looks like in this picture there, they're on horses riding around primordial cows and stuff. Only problem is there's woolly mammoths and crap at that same time. So it gives you a totally different picture, and all those things we had as we were kids, in Land of the Lost. You remember that with the slee stack lizard people? But then there was these people and Chaka and all that. It was supposed to be us just a few thousand years ago, but yet it had a T-Rex, and it had those at the same time in this Land of the Lost. I ought to do a video about thoughts of people in the early ages all the way up to the 1800s on Land of the Lost, and what came up with the ideas of King Kong in this land where there might be a T-Rex still, or giant creatures or things, dinosaurs, a land that time forgot. There you go. As enlightening as these findings are, the authors still claim that these two populations lived side by side as much as 10,000 years without interbreeding, which could seem plausible if you're convinced you're dealing with a pre-human group and a human group. Like trying to get somebody to breed with a primitive can be pretty difficult. You have to shove all kinds of agenda and things onto them and so on, or it can be forced in some ways. The truth is, however, that we're dealing with men as modern as you and I. And so when we talk about things like that, you'd think, well, what did keep them apart? Well, if you look at Bible and things like that, people were pretty segregated, and they were all Caucasians in the first place, just due to dogmas and little beliefs that they had and stuff. We still have that kind of today. No, and not to pick on people, you can see it in the French and Italians, you can see it in everybody, and they have a sense of pride, and that's totally acceptable. But at the same time, it can cause problems when somebody doesn't realize the bigger pictures that are shown in the art gallery of history and life. Recent sequencing of the Neanderthal genome has conclusively shown that not only did Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal interbreed, but that current Caucasian and Asian populations share Neanderthal genetics. The article is abstract as follows below. And yeah, I'll go ahead and read this. We're going to go through the whole thing here. DNA sequences from ancient specimens may in fact result from undetected contamination of the ancient specimens by modern DNA, and the problem is particularly challenging in the studies of human fossils. Doubts on the authenticity of the available sequences have also so far hampered genetic comparisons between anatomically archaic Neanderthal and early modern Cro-Magnon Europeans. Methodology principle findings. We typed the mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, hypervariable region I in a 28,000-year-old Cro-Magnoid individual from the Puglisi cave in Italy, Puglisi 23 as it's known, and all the people who had contact with the sample since its discovery in 2003. The Puglisi 23 sequence determined that through the analysis of 152 clones is the Cambridge reference sequence and cannot possibly reflect contamination because it differs from all potential contaminating modern sequences. In other words, anybody that could have contaminated it did not carry this sequence. If they would have done the Maury thing and they go, no, it was Jill. Jill over here sneezed on it. Or something like that. No, it's not. They go through all kinds of methods, clean room ideals, all kinds of things, people. It's amazing what they go through, but they have to. Otherwise, they'd just be blown in the wind. With all this equipment and all this expense and all the science that led up to it, then somebody's just going to go ahead and cough on the sample and throw it in the machine. It's not the way it works. Because all potential sources of a modern DNA contamination are known, the Puglisi 23 sample will offer a unique opportunity to get insight for the first time into the nuclear genes of early modern Europeans. They've changed this now. There's no longer a Cro-Magnon. Yeah, everything's warping and changing. Cro-Magnon is now just early European modern humans. Added to this and other anomalies, we have the human skull that challenges the out of Africa theory outright. The discovery of a skull in Greece that was a potential to change what we know about human evolution, and a suppression and a cover-up which followed. And I recently did a video about this that was supposed to come out last Christmas in a series of ones that was going to be like, guess what we're going to talk about this year? And I didn't get to really do that, guys, so I'm kind of shoving this on you in different ways, but hopefully you're keeping up with it for my regulars and stuff that's going on. And hey, like, share, and subscribe here if you like what's going on here, and check out some of my other videos. You'd be surprised the weird variety of topics that I go through and things that I reveal to people that maybe are not well known, if known hardly at all. We are going to go here in a few minutes to part 3, and it'll be in your top left-hand corner. It was known as Petrolona Man, or Arcanthropus of Petrolona, as it has since been called, was found to be 700,000 years old, making it the oldest human Europeoid, presenting European traits of that age never discovered in Europe before. Dr. Arius Paulanos' research showed that Petrolona Man had evolved separately in Europe and was not an ancestor of a species that had even come out of Africa. And that shows you the variation in how old it goes. It was called Chalky Dicky Man, remember? Some authors believe that Petrolona cranium is derived from a unique class of hominids, different from Homo erectus. Runnels and Van Annel summarize the simulation as such. So in other words, not Homo erectus, or what I often believe as a kid, that Homo erectus, being around for so long, had a variety and change that went into it, and it may have something to do with something they intergressed with that we don't know or well of. But there's a whole big difference even in the skulls that you see of Homo erectus from here and here and here and here. And so they're showing already a wide variety. It's not like, oh, it's the same guy. It's a wide variety way back at that point. But this guy summarized it as such. The only known hominid fossil in Greece that may be relevant is the Petrolona hominid, found by chance in 1960 in a deep cavern in the Chalkidiki cave. Controversy surrounds the interpretation of this cranium and has been variously classified as Homo erectus, as a classic Neanderthal, Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, see how they Homo sapiens did, but also as an early representative of Homo sapiens in a generalized sense, and this was said by Day in 1986 on page 9195. And man, there's a lot of possibilities here. Whenever people put out papers and statements like that, it gives you an idea, well, it could be just about anybody, but then they figured out, no, it's not. And the weird thing is they found other people. They found this Gracopithecus freibergi, which looks like a preemptive type hominid in Greece, hence its name, El Greco they call it, and Auranthropithecus macedoniensis, so like in the Greek Macedonian, Auranopithecus, seems to be the same type of thing and leads right into this thing too, and that goes back perhaps even farther than that, but we won't get into that right here yet. The consensus among paleoanthropologists today is that the cranium belongs to an archaic hominid distinguished from Homo erectus and both the classic Neanderthals and anatomically modern humans. So another variation on a theme is what they're trying to say. But yet this might have something to do with it all, and sure shows something in lineage. Research published in the U.S. in 1971 in the prestigious Archaeology magazine backed up the findings that the skull was indeed 700,000 years old after repeated retesting. This was based on an analysis of the cave stratigraphy and the sediment in which the skull was embedded within. They have a sign out from front of it right now that says it's 300,000 years old, which just tries to throw it all in question and you go, oh, it's all about 300,000, so ooh. Whereas they dated it too. And then they had further research in the cave discovered isolated teeth and 2 other pre-human skeletons dating back to 800,000 years ago, as well as other fossils of various species. Today, most academics who have analyzed the Petrolona remains say that the cranium of Archaeanthropus of Petrolona belongs to an archaic hominid distinguished from Homo erectus and from both the classic Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon, but showing characteristics of all these species and presenting a strong European trait. The Petrolona hominid specifically was located in a stratigraphic layer containing the most amount of tools and traces of habitation. Polano states that the age of the overall layer is approximately 670,000 years old, based on electron spin resonance measurements. Further excavations at Petrolona revealed 2 human skeletons that were dated to be 800,000 years old, and any skull found in Greece dating back at least 700,000 years old, which is either Homo sapiens or part Homo sapien, is in direct conflict with the out of Africa theory of human evolutions. And we're reaching the 45-minute mark and going to go on to part 3, which is in your top left-hand corner. Click on it as it comes up, and hey, make sure you come back, click like on this, and come back and leave a comment on what was stated in this video, perhaps. Or hopefully you put something in already. See you in part 3, top left. Peace.